Hey, welcome back to Scrap Cooking. I'm Harriet Clooney. This is a show where we're going to show you how to reduce your waste and save a bit of money. Today we're going to be doing an apple pie or galette or tart, whichever you'd like to call it. And I'm going to show you two different ways to do dough. We're going to do a pie dough by hand and one in the food processor. So regardless of whether you have a food processor, you can still make it. So let's get started. So just before we start, hit that subscribe button. And if you have anything you would want me to show you how to do or have comments or suggestions, we would love to hear this. So put some in the comment section for me. So we're gonna make apple pie. I'm gonna show you two different ways to do the dough, one by hand and one in a food processor. And this dough is a really cool dough because it's a classic recipe, but it's one that is by ratio. So it doesn't matter how much you have. You can have a little bit or a lot, and it will help you use all of that ingredients that you have. So it's a 3-2-1 dough. So it means we break everything down into parts. So you need 1 part water, 2 parts fat, so butter or shortening, and 3 parts flour. So for us here, I've decided 150 was the right amount. So we're gonna do 150 milliliters of water. Then we're gonna do 300 of butter, and then 450 of flour. So 300 of butter is just over half a pound. So we'll do that. And we want to keep our butter cold, so I'm going to cut it up into small chunks, and then I'm going to put it in the freezer for about 10 minutes. So I'm just cutting up the butter into small cubes. This is going to make it easier for us to break into little chunks. All right, so we've got all our butter cubed up. So I am going to put, so half of this is 250. And then we're just gonna take a couple extras to make it 300. And we wanna keep the butter cold because we don't want the fat to melt in the flour, because when it does that, it doesn't help make it flaky. So what happens was when the butter stays into pieces, and you're rolling it out, when it goes in the oven, there's a little bit of water that's in the butter, and it will steam up, and then it helps create your flakes. So that's why we like the butter to be nice and cold, and keep it into little chunks, because we don't want to blend it all in. The dough will be a bit tougher and not as flaky, so that's why we like to do it this way. So I'm gonna put this in the freezer for about 10-15 minutes. And these chunks I'm gonna save, but I'm gonna put them in the fridge for the apples. All right, it's been 15 minutes. Our butter is cold. We don't want it to be frozen because then it'll be really hard to cut it, but at least it's cold, so it'll just help keep it stay that way because we don't want it to melt. So I've got my flour, so I got 450 grams of flour, but it's just under 2 cups. And I've got about a 1/4 cup of sugar. I'm gonna add that in. And 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So I'm gonna add just gonna mix that. I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. Now I'm gonna add in my butter. So we've got everything in there, and we're just gonna cut it up. So I've got this pastry cutter, and if you're at home and you don't have a pastry cutter, you can use your hands. You just wanna make sure that you're not melting the butter, you're just breaking it up, but it is doable. The other thing you can do is use a grater to grate your butter, and then it's already in the small pieces that you need. Or you can cut your butter into smaller pieces. But I've got this nice pastry cutter, So I'm gonna do that. And the pastry cutter is good because your hands are warm, you know, being a warm-blooded creature as we are, they will melt the butter, and that is exactly what we are trying to avoid. So the pastry cutter is really good for that. So we want the pieces to be sort of like the size of a pea. I'm gonna keep going a little bit here because we're not quite there. I love the ratio dough because even if you only have you have a little bit of butter, you only have 1 apple, you can make this recipe and just make a baby one. Or if you need to make it for lots and lots and lots of people, it's really easy to scale up because it's just a ratio. And whatever it is that you don't have a lot of, you can use that as your base part. So if you only had, 100 grams of butter, you'd make that the 2 parts, and then scale everything from there. So it makes it very versatile, which I really like. It can take a bit to wrap your mind around a ratio. It took me a little bit, but once I sort of started using them, I was like, oh, so handy when you're in a bind. All right, so I think we have achieved what we are looking for. So we've got, you can see there's still chunks of butter, and it feels cold, which is good. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add the water, but I'm gonna add some ice to it. I've already measured out the water, so we don't have to worry about what it looks like with ice in it. The ice is just to keep the water cold for the same purpose as freezing the butter. It's just to really keep that butter cold, keep the fat cold, so we're not melting it. And because we're gonna be mixing it with our hands, the heat from our hands may melt the butter, so we wanna keep it as cold as we can. So I'm just gonna add in a little bit of ice. Just stir it with my finger. So I'm not gonna add it all in right at once. I'm gonna add maybe half of it in. And then when you add water to flour, that's when it starts developing gluten. So we, in pie dough, don't really want to develop the gluten too much. So we're only just mixing it until it all comes together and not kneading it like you would a bread dough. So that's what develops the elasticity, which is what you want in a bread dough, but not what you want in a pie dough. So I am gonna add a little bit, the rest of that water. Then I kind of use it like almost like a sponge. So I want to kind of collect all the bits that are there. So I find that kind of helps not work it too much. So kind of pushing it. My preheated oven is done. All right, so I don't really want to work it anymore. So all these little pieces, so there you can see there's still a little bit of pieces. They're still kind of flaky, which is fine because we're gonna wrap it in saran wrap and then kind of tighten it within the saran wrap, and then we're gonna let it rest. And that's when the water that's in there is gonna expand a little bit and kind of incorporate the rest of the dough all together to make it one cohesive mass. All right, so the second way to make the dough is in the food processor. So the first way is really good if you don't have a food processor, and it's good and it doesn't make all that many dishes. The second way is way faster, but you have a bit more dishes. But and it's really cool though. So we're gonna go over here to our food processor, and I've got my flour. So it's 450 grams, just under 2 cups. And I'm gonna add my 1/4 cup of sugar and my 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And we're gonna add the butter in, and it's been in the freezer for about 10-15 minutes, just keep it cold. And this butter could be all the way frozen because the machine is does its work a bit faster than me. But so we are gonna pulse it to get it started. And then we're gonna sort of let it go. Makes that lovely noise. And there you have it. So, again, we just want pieces, little chunks. So it makes pretty quick work of that. And now we're gonna add in some ice water. So again, I've measured out my water first, and then I'm gonna add some ice to it. Got my water. We're gonna get it going. I'm gonna put it on low, and then I'm gonna add in my water. I just want it to kind of come together. There we go. Yep, there. So you can kind of see. So it's got these sort of chunks. And there's a little bit of flour, so I'm gonna put it in this bowl and just kind of work those little edges. Just again, try to get those little, hey, get back in there. There we go, all right, and that's all we're gonna do. And then we're gonna go back to our saran wrap, and we're gonna saran wrap it up and let it sit for about 20 minutes. All right, I got this, got a little piece of saran wrap here. And again, if you don't have any saran wrap, no worries. You can use a tea towel or even parchment paper or wax paper, that works too. So we've turned out the bowl, and we're gonna kind of squish it together. And then I'm gonna wrap it. Now I'm gonna squish it. The squishing it, I find, helps it kind of come together, but also it makes it easier to roll out because you don't have to start from somewhere higher and push down. I find it a lot easier to roll when it's partially done for you. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but you can see that there's pieces of butter. You can see all the little flecks of butter, which is good because that's gonna make our dough nice and flaky. All right, so we're gonna let this rest for 20 minutes, and that just lets the gluten relax because it's really, really tight right now. So we're just gonna let it chill out, and in the meantime, we'll get working on our apples. All right, so now we're gonna get to the apples. I have used here Lobo apples, so they're a Canadian specialty. They're related to Macintosh, and it's the beginning of the season, so they're a bit more tart. As the season gets going, they get a bit sweeter. So at the beginning of the season, they're good for baking. They're a bit, they get soft, but in this preparation, I think that's good. But not too soft. So we're gonna use this whole apple, but not for the pie. I'm gonna use just the meat of the apple for the pie, but I'm gonna save the peels, and we're gonna do another recipe later on that is, we're gonna dehydrate the peels and we're gonna make some little oatmeal kits, apple, brown sugar, cinnamon oatmeal with the dehydrated peels, and then we're gonna show you how to make some cider vinegar with the scraps, with the cores. So we're gonna peel this apple. So if you got a peeler, you can use a knife if you don't got a peeler, but I always try to get it in one. It's a game I like to play with myself. Haha. So If you have an apple core, you can use that, but I usually can't find mine or don't have one. So I actually just cut around the apple in a square. So take one side off, and then you have this little square guy, and we're gonna save those. I also find that doing it makes it easier to cut than doing it. So, things with flat surfaces are easier, easier to cut. All right, so my cores, I'm gonna save as well, and we're gonna make that apple scrap vinegar out of it as well. So now we've got our apples. I'm just gonna push them over to one side, and we are going to cut them into pieces that are able to, we don't want them to be too thin, but we don't want them to be too thick either, but we kind of want them to be able to fan out, because we're gonna be making them pretty in our tart. So, but I am gonna put them in this bowl as we're going. Apples are quite acidic, so when you're done cutting them, it's always good to either rinse your knife or wipe it off. Otherwise, it may oxidize and kind of get little rust spots, which you don't want. So we've got our apples, nice and cut, and I've got probably about a cup of sugar here and a tablespoon of cinnamon, and I'm just gonna mix them together. So we're not gonna throw it all on there, and it's good to keep, it'll keep forever. But we're gonna coat them, well, maybe about half, and then we're gonna gently toss them so that all our apples are coated in delicious cinnamon sugar. And if any are stuck together, you kind of break them apart. Might need a little. There we go. Now what we're gonna do, and I can just put that in a container and use another day, is, so we want to add just a little bit of either lemon flavor and juice for just a little bit of added acidity. And if you don't have a lemon, you can use cider vinegar or any other vinegar. The cider vinegar is a bit nicer, apple. But if you have another vinegar, that's fine too. So you just need, if it's like vinegar, maybe just like a tablespoon and a half. Since I have a lemon, and the lemon flavor is so lovely, we're gonna take the lemon and we're gonna use this rasp. But if you don't have a rasp, you can use a grater. You just wanna be careful not to push too hard on the lemon, because you don't want to get this, the white part, which is called the pith, which is very bitter. You just want the skin, which has got all that wonderful lemon oil in it, which gives it that nice lemon flavor. So now I'm just gonna cut this lemon. Take out the middles. I just find it easier to seed. Take out my seeds. I won't need the whole lemon. I'll just need probably just this third of the lemon. And you can use the other part of the lemon for anything else you'd put lemon juice in, or even just throw it in your water. I like to throw these little middle pieces of the lemon into my drinking water. Has a nice lemon flavor. All right. So I'm just gonna squeeze this lemon over there, and I'm just gonna toss it. Try to escape. And that is it. Now we are gonna roll out the dough and form our galette. All right, so now our dough is rested, our apples are ready to go, so now we're gonna roll out this dough. So I have this silicone mat that is very handy, but if you don't have a silicone mat, you can use some parchment paper if you have that, and if you don't have that, that's okay too. I would roll it out on a cutting board, and then, but we'll have to flour the bottom extra well so that it doesn't stick to the board, because then you have to pick up the whole board and kind of move the tart onto your pan. But, so we're gonna take our dough out. And we're gonna flour this. And I like to do it right on the silicone because then I can just pick the whole thing up and put it over there. So, flour it well. And then your rolling pin, I like to start in the middle and push down and then roll out and then roll back. Then every now and then I kind of roll it over so that it doesn't stick to my mat. So it's a free-form tart, so it doesn't really have to be perfectly round. It can be any shape that it gets rolled. And we want to make it over the edge. We're making it bigger than we want it because we're going to roll those edges over top. All right, so we don't want it to be too thin, and we don't want it to be too thick, so that, you know, perfect spot, the Goldilocks. So I've got it probably about 1/4 inch, and they can see these nice little chunks of butter that have been rolled out. So now we're gonna make, now we're gonna take our apples and we're gonna start making them pretty. So we're gonna start in the middle and kind of do concentric circles all the way around. So this might take a bit. But it will look beautiful and it will be delicious. Okay, so I've got this nice 1-inch border, so I sort of moved the apples where there was extra space. That's the nice thing about the freeform. And so now we're gonna fold it up. Kind of tuck it in. So it's a pretty classic French dessert, galette, and it's lovely. So we're just gonna bake it like that. I do have this little egg over here, so I'm just going to crack it and mix it. So I got my egg, got a fork, just gonna mix it. And then we're just gonna brush the edges. And that's just gonna help you with the nice browning, have a nice glaze. And if you don't have a brush, there's a couple different things you could use. I have, in a bind, used the saran wrap that I had my dough wrapped in and scrunched it up into a little ball and used that to brush. That works. Same with parchment paper, though not as well. You can use your fingers, and that works too. Oh, it's a bit messier. There we go. So we have one last thing we're gonna do. We're just gonna get the remaining butter that we had from the cubes that I put in the fridge. So we're just gonna tuck a couple pieces. That's gonna cook, melt, brown a little bit. Here's our beautiful freeform pie. And that's the nice thing. We're just gonna pick it up and put it on our pan. And we're gonna bake it. So it's at 350, it's gonna take about an hour. All right, the kitchen smells so good. It's got that apple cinnamon, delicious wafting through the air. So that usually means that the pie is done. So we're gonna check it out. I did up the temperature from 350 to 400. Every oven is different. So I found that when I checked it the first time, it wasn't really browning. So I upped the temperature, but every oven is different. So never know. Oh yeah, look at that. So we've got this beautiful pie. Delicious. Got nice browning on the top. Look at that pie crust, looks awesome. So we're gonna let that cool down so that we can cut it and get my colleagues to eat it, because I can't, but I can smell it and be jealous. All right, so we're just gonna let that guy cool down. Okay, look at that. So now our pie has been cooling down for the past half an hour, and it looks good to go. So I'm gonna gently take it off. And like I said before, I have an apple allergy and I cannot eat it. However, I do have a lovely camera person that's gonna taste it for me. So we're just gonna cut it. We're gonna cut it like a pizza. We got that nice crust on the bottom. Makes a nice sound. And the apples are nice and pretty. You can eat it like a pizza too. All right. I love making dessert, and I really love apples, and so it's very hard for me to not eat it, but I like making it for other people. So how is your pie? Woohoo! We did it. Awesome. So we have this lovely galette, which is super awesome because you actually don't have any little trim for the pie crust. You're just using the whole thing. So it's one of the reasons why I like the galette version instead of the crimping, is that we're not wasting any of the pie crust. So thanks so much for watching. Enjoy your pie. And remember that when you use a ratio, you can make it as big or as little as you want. So it could be a 1 apple pie, it could be much larger. So enjoy your pie, and I'll see you next time.